Trends O'Clock. This is Trends KE with KK Cedric.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. This is Trends KE. It's been a while since we were on this platform for a discussion. The election happened, it passed, and you all know what has happened between this time and then. Today we are having a discussion on the Supreme petition. There is a petition that has been submitted by the coalition of that's led by Raila Odinga to seeking to nullify the election or to declare Raila as president. We will be asking the lawyers of all the possibilities that are there in that petition. There are also other about 8 petitions against the election, and that's the whole discussion we are going to have. And also talk briefly about the election that we've had and how different it has been to the other elections we've had in the past. And we shall be getting straight into that discussion. So if you're tuned in, please invite a friend for this discussion. It's going to be interesting. You can send in your questions if you have any in the comment section, and we shall be reading it for those watching on YouTube and on the Facebook or on Twitter. This is the Alternative Voice, and welcome to the discussion. So I'll be introducing to you the guest that we are having on the show tonight. And as always, we are having here Nelson Ruggieri Mandela. He has been on this platform more than once, more than twice, very many times, and he's actually the right person, as well as our second guest that we are having to discuss matters law. Welcome to the show, Wakil.
Thank you, Cedric, for having me.
And the other guest we are having tonight here, we are having Emmanuel Elijah. Eli is also a lawyer, and he shall also be helping us dissect into these matters, law and petitions at the Supreme Court. Guys, welcome to the discussion, Eli. It's your first time here. Thank you very much for heading and coming to this platform.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, so we are getting into this discussion right on, and we have just had an election that has ended a few weeks ago, and there are petitions mostly for the presidential election. But let me just ask you, I'll start with you, Wakili Mandela. How would you rate how Kenyans and IEBC have conducted this election that has just happened this year in relation to the other elections that we have had in the past?
Yes, once again, Cedric, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being back here after the election. And because we've been talking, we used to talk before the election, and we used to discuss the possibilities and the possible outcome of this election. And you must confirm to our audience that most of the predictions that I made about this election came to pass, save for the presidential one, which has just did not just come to pass, did not fail to pass, but it just been placed aside for a little while as we wait for the determination of the Supreme Court. You asked the question as how I can rate this election compared to the previous election, and I can tell you, first, we want to laud Kenyans for the peace that they've maintained during and after the election. You know, I saw somebody tweet and say it was a boring election. It was an international media house that said Kenya had a boring election. To that extent, that boring election was a compliment to us, because ordinarily, the world outside there has always known that when we're having an election in Africa, it must be chaotic, especially more so in Kenya. People have always expected that elections are a matter of life and death in this country. But for the first time, Kenyans went and voted and came back home, retreated and waited for the results. And when those who are not satisfied with the results proceeded to the Supreme Court, and everybody is anxiously waiting for the determination, which is a good thing. And it shows that we've matured as a country, we've matured as a democracy, and the world out there is watching, and at least they know that Kenyans can proceed to the ballot. They agree to disagree. You vote for your favorite candidate. Should they win and they're not challenged in court, you celebrate. Should they lose and they challenge in court, to wait for the determination? That shows that we have confidence in our institutions of governance. We have confidence in IEBC because held an election, there was not much dispute. Save for the presidential election, not many petitions have been filed out of this election. But also speaking to that extent, people have taken these petitions, like you've rightly said, we have over 8 petitions of the Supreme Court, which people have filed contesting this election, and everybody is anxiously waiting. The respondents are acting in decorum and responding to those petitions. So it shows that this election, it might not be 100% sure or credible, but to some extent, we've made some progress in the manner that we've been holding our elections, the manner that we've been disputing election in this country.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Akili. And I'll bring the same question to you, Ellie. Larry Madowo reported on CNN that this was one of the most boring elections that Kenya has ever had. In your words, and mostly giving reference to very many people who conceded, I know this has affected those of you who are in the legal industry very much because people are conceding very fast. How would you rate these elections that we have had this year?
Well, first, let me agree with Mandela. Most of the things that he has said, I actually agree with. Kenyans have remained peaceful in this process. The Kenyans that we expected to react or are naturally expected to react exercised a lot of restraint. And that is a demonstration that we are beginning to mature as a democracy. And we are beginning to have trust in the institutions that have been tasked with these, responsibilities of conducting this kind of processes like the IEBC. On the question of the election generally and how it was conducted, in my view, I would agree that yes, it was a boring election. And why I say that is because the only time we saw the excitement around this election was the time that the candidates were campaigning. I mean, that is the only time we saw people excited, taking part in the campaigns, going to rallies and that kind of thing. But when it came to the very important question of turning out to vote, we let ourselves down. We let the country down, and I have to say that because the turnout was an all-time low, and that is why I would agree that yes, it was a boring election. Remember, if you'll remember, IBC had been conducting registration of voters for quite a long time, and no one was actually turning up to register. People are not turning out to transfer their votes. People are not turning out to confirm their details as provided in the IBC, KIMS kit and other devices. And when that period ended, there was a lot of complaint from even politicians who are now going to contest for some of these political seats for IBC to actually extend that deadline. And they did extend that deadline, but still people did not turn out to register as voters. And the people that we are talking about here are mostly young people. Those are the people that have just turned 18, the people who have just received their IDs, and you expect them that now, since they have registered, and they have identification documents, they will now proceed to register as voters. They did not turn out, and I think that was the biggest letdown for us as a country in this election. The other thing that I would mention around the IEBC is a lot of people consider defeat, which is a good thing. It means that the process, confidence is beginning to build in the process. But for the first time, I don't know when last we saw this, we have seen a commission that is now divided. There is no unity in the... I don't know when or where any of us has ever seen an institution that is tasked with conducting an election like the IEBC in Kenya, on the day that the election is going to be announced, we have two factions. One is saying, and the majority is actually the ones who are disputing the result, and the few are remaining are the ones that are going to announce. And that is what is going to reduce the confidence that we have even in that institution.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. And let's get into that discussion. And I'm bringing it back to you, Mandela. Would we say that Raila Amolo Odinga is fifth time unlucky, or do you think this time actually the petition that he has submitted will and might just get him into that presidency on his fifth term? And in relation to that, also answer my question that apart from the petition submitted by Azimio, do you think the rest of the petitions, I think there are 8 of them, do you think any of the rest of the petitions stands water to get through to the final day through the petition at the Supreme Court?
Yes, thank you, Cedric. Now we entered the debate proper, the discussion proper, as to whether Raila Odinga is fifth time unlucky in his presidential case. Now, this was a democratic process. And like we've said, the election that we held, luckily we had to vote for 6 individuals. The MCAs in the country, we all know that they were content with the results. The members of parliament, today there was an orientation in parliament for the first time, members of parliament. Governors were sworn in today. You cannot tell me that if somebody wants to see this election, they will just be focusing, because I can tell you, I interact with these members of parliament and all these people in authority, and I can tell you leadership or being in power is a matter of life and death to them. The privileges they enjoy while in power, they may not be able. Once these people lose this power, they even sink into depression. So yes, if Raila Odinga is fifth time unlucky in his bid to become the president of Kenya, I'll give a very firm answer. Yes. This election, by the time we were going to the ballot, for the 5 days that these votes were being tallied and verified at Bomas of Kenya, we had media houses doing their tally. We all witnessed. We had chief agents verifying the forms. And you see, this election was held in accordance with the Raila Odinga 2 case, 2017, that if should there be any server, it should be open for verification. And you remember last election, there was even a Supreme Court order that Chebukati should allow Raila Odinga, the petitioners and the response, to access the server. But they could not. This time around, there was something they called a public portal. Now, if you're telling me that Raila Odinga, let's assume he's lucky, even in that petition, save for Raila Odinga putting a prayer number 9 that the Supreme Court should retally the votes and announce him as president-elect, in their own tabulation, they agree. William Ruto was leading with 49.999%, and they were trailing. They're not claiming that even in their own tabulation, after presenting all these forms in court, there is nowhere they've tabulated and said, as a coalition, the reason why we're petitioning this election and want to be announced president, we got the requisite 50 plus 1%. There is nowhere. And therefore, this election, having been fair, I fail to understand why there was an issue just hours to the president being declared. The issue of the divided commission does not stand. I can tell you for a fact. This commissioner, Cedric, even a toddler in this country right now knows that these commissioners were planted, they have been blackmailed. And this is what I want the country to know. Unlike the commissioners who serve on termly basis, there are appointees of certain individuals, the judges of Supreme Court of Kenya enjoy what we call security of tenure. For them, they're going to make an informed decision knowing that their job is secured in the law. They'll serve to their retirement ages. Unlike the commissioner who will be told, if you don't do this, you're going to be fired. If you don't do this, you're going to be suspended. The Supreme Court judges, enjoy the security of tenure, and therefore the decision is going to be binding. And this one, what I'll tell you, Cedric, in 2017, I was in Raila Odinga's camp. I was one of the strongest NASA supporters, suicidal support of Raila Odinga. Raila Odinga petitioned the Supreme Court. The election was nullified. You all know what happened after there was a rerun. What assurance are we getting today with the allegations of a divided commission, with the allegation that should we have another election? Even Raila Odinga yesterday claimed that Chebukati was not fit to preside over the election in Mombasa and Kakamega counties, which was wrong because national returning officers do not preside over county elections. County returning officers are gazetted and they control, and therefore Chebukati does not touch on the county election. But this is what I'm saying. Once this allegation of a divided commission comes up, and we are telling the Supreme Court to nullify this election, there is only one end to it. Should the Supreme Court declare that this election is nullified, Raila Odinga will not take part in the next election. And this is what is going to happen. We all know those close to Raila Odinga, including Atuoli, including Murade, they're on record having said Uhuru Kenyatta is too young to retire. This is the scheme. Because from the look of things, Cedric, if you go to another election right now, William Ruto is going to scoop even more than 60% of the votes. This was just a mere 14 and we are fighting. People have a tendency of aligning themselves to victory. As we say, victory has 1,000 fathers, defeat is an orphan. You all know what has been happening since last week. People shifting camp, independent candidates, all these affiliate parties to Azimio crossing over. Raila Odinga and the Azimio patron, Uhuru Kenyatta, cannot allow this country to go to another election. But the scheme is they'd rather have Uhuru Kenyatta continuing to rule than having William Ruto being sworn in. So this Supreme Court petition is just a gamble. The Supreme Court cannot come and announce Raila Odinga president-elect from the very process that he says was compromised. Why would you want to be a beneficiary of a very electoral body of the very process that you're saying was compromised from the start? And therefore, this is a scheme. And what I know and what I've heard, Supreme Court judges enjoy security of tenure. They cannot be intimidated, and they know what happened when they bungled the last election, how their budgets were cut, how judges were intimidated. Right now, we still have 6 Court of Appeal judges yet to be sworn in, to be appointed by the president because of what happened in 2017. And therefore, judges are very learned people. I can tell you, Cedric, these petitions, whether 10, whether 15, whether 60, they'll be dismissed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we are talking about 2 lorries full of petition. I want to bring you into this conversation, Ellie. As you also respond to what Mandela has said, aside from the 0.01 era, there is Cherera and the 4 commissioners on one side, and then there is the chair and 2 other commissioners on the other side who are saying that the election went on well. Do you think that the differences between the commissioners of IEBC could be used to the advantage of Azimio team to enable their petition go through, either as by their prayers to have Raila declared as president-elect by the Supreme Court, or have the election nullified? Do you think the differences in the commission would work for the Azimio team?
Before I come to that question, allow me to rebut some of the things that my friend Mandela has said. Yes. If you've read the judgment, the majority judgment of the decision of the Supreme Court in 2017, the Supreme Court came out very strongly to explain itself on the issue of the election. And it said that an election is not an event. An election is a process. And every process in this election, from the beginning to the end, is important and is is actually prescribed in law. That process is prescribed in law, and therefore, what what the IEBC is supposed to do is they are only supposed to go back to the law and say, what does the law provide for this, for this level, for this level, for this step, for this step? Okay, we want to tally the votes. What does the law say? How do are we supposed to tally? We want to announce. Everything is prescribed, and our constitution is very prescriptive. By the way, it gives a lot of details on what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it. So the process that Chebukati and company took this country is supposed to be audited, and the institution that is supposed to audit that process has already been invited to do so, the Supreme Court. We have 8 petitions. I have a problem with the number of petitions, definitely, because that means that even in court we are going to have to share the time. If you have 3 hours as a petitioner, that means you have 3 hours for all the petitioners, and the respondents will have are the same. So definitely they will have a longer time to respond to the issues and probably give more detail. So I have a problem with and so I have a problem with so many clogging the Supreme Court with a lot of petitions. I would rather we would have 1 or 2 petitions that are strategic and that are straight to the point and evidence to explain itself on that matter. Now, the issue of the commissioners that you have raised is important, and what the commissioners are saying, the 0.01% does not arise. I think that mathematics was dead on arrival. That mathematics did not work. But what they are saying is this: that as a commission, we were denied an opportunity to verify this election, to verify the results of this election. The constitutional threshold for a general election are very clear, that we are supposed to have an election that is free, fair, verifiable, transparent, and credible. That is the constitutional threshold. And therefore, even though you are a national returning officer for the presidential election, who also doubles up as the chair of the IBC, you have to act within the limits of the constitution, and therefore the results that the chair is supposed to announce are supposed to be results that have been tallied by the commission, verified by the commission and even the agents, and agents have signed. Right? Agents have signed that we endorse our hands on these results. Yes. Therefore, you can go ahead and announce. But if you are going to announce results that have not been tallied, we have 27 or even more constituencies which had not been announced. The results in these constituencies had not been tallied. They had not been announced. And we know 27 constituencies means quite a number of votes, a sizable number of votes. And let me say this election was very close. It was a very close election. And I think the closer the election, the tighter the race, the more careful the IBC has to be with the numbers, because it means even a single vote could make a difference, right? A single vote could make a difference. What I have read from those petitions, and I've gone through the petition of Raila Odinga, I've not had the time to go through the other petitions. I've gone through the petition of Raila Odinga. And what Raila Odinga is saying is that this election was rigged at the portal. It was hacked, and therefore we cannot verify. We know even in the affidavit of John Gidongo, if my colleague Mandela has read it, we have someone who is attacking the likes of Itumbi, the likes of those kind of people, and saying that those are the people that were actually leading the onslaught on the IEBC servers, so that they were actually uploading documents, deleting some, and they had access. So these are the questions for us here. We cannot verify those claims, And that is why we have the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has the opportunity to collect the evidence, to hear all the parties, to hear the response from the respondents, to hear the rejoinders, and then finally to retire and make a decision. Whatever the decision of the Supreme Court makes is a decision that we believe will be a just decision, and it should be respected by everyone, including Raila Odinga and company.
Thank you. And as you are speaking, we shall get into the specifics of the petition you have talked about. It's an interesting one. But as you're speaking, someone else joined us live from Belgium. Thank you, Dan, for joining us. And you have just joined us while we are discussing about the petitions. And we earlier on talked about how the election was. We are having two lawyers in the house. From your side, Dan, I don't know if you are able to vote. You will tell us about that. But then what is your thoughts about the whole idea of the elections petitions, especially coming from Baba Raila Amolo Odinga? This should be the third time petitioning an election. Do you think that this whole idea of petition is taking the country backwards, or is it helping to grow the democracy from where you stand, Dan? Your mic, if you can unmute kindly. Still can't get you. I don't know if it's a problem with your mic. Not yet. So I'll be getting back to you. Let me get to Wakili as you prepare your mic. Just try and unmute or work on the earphone you're using. Wakili, Eli has brought in the idea of the Gidongo petition, and going through it, it sounded like a movie. At all, that is what happened, and we shall be listening to the case. And unless we get into sub judice, we shall be listening to the case, how it proceeds, and all the other petitions on how allegedly the election was rigged. Don't you think that such would actually make it to the Supreme Court and later on lead to the nullification of the results, if at all it stands ground?
Yes, thank you, Cedric. You know, I've read through Gidongo's affidavit. I've even watched the video, and what I can say is that Gidongo is a good script writer, and also that is a very qualified, a very properly qualified donor funding proposal. These people, busybodies working for NGOs who think petitioning the Supreme Court will make their donors feel like they're working, we love them. You know, in this country, economy is bad and people must make a living. So the likes of Gidongo, Akina Halifa, and all these other people, probably this time, Okia Omtata, who is a very beneficiary of this election, and nobody's contesting his win in Busia County as a senator, he is now mourning more than the bereaved and proceeding to petition the Supreme Court of how this election was not credible, and yet is a beneficiary. He won that election and his competitor conceded. He's not been sued for rigging, but he's up there proceeding to the Supreme Court saying IBC is not qualified, IBC is incompetent, IBC did not hold a free, fair, and verifiable election, yet he won and is just awaiting swearing in. So the issue of all these petitions is we have people who have very different motives, and most of them being NGOs. This is the only way, you know, activism died in the whole government after the handshake, so activists are not doing anything. So this is the only time they can put their own meaningful. Now, Eli had raised an issue that this election was declared I mean, the results were declared by Chebukati without having the commissioners verify, and also while we still had like 27 constituencies who had not handed in their Form 34Bs. This is the issue. This is the fact. We had 14 million Kenyans in the ballot vote. We had William Ruto crossing the 50% plus one threshold. So the remaining votes, irrespective of the number of constituencies that had not turned in their Form 34Bs, it made no sense because somebody had already gotten 50% plus one of the votes cast. So we did not have to wait for the remaining 27. You can determine and decide a winner pending those forms, because the threshold here, the constitutional threshold, is somebody must get 50% plus one of the votes cast, and William Ruto had already crossed. So there was no point of us having to wait for the other 27 constituencies to hand in their Form 34Bs.
I think I have to object. I have to object that I think my friend Mandela must be one of those lawyers who joined the profession because they were running away from mathematics. That is very evident here. 27 constituencies is a huge number. I mean, 27 constituency does not, even if we have to work with say a constituency had only 20,000 people to vote, if you multiply that times 27, that gives you a huge number of voters. And if you look at the difference between, let's just use the IEBC numbers for argument's sake. If you look at the difference between William Ruto and Raila Odinga, they're just about 200 and maybe 30 votes. And the votes that William Ruto actually used to cross the 50 plus one marks were only about 70,000 votes. So you can't say that 27 constituencies votes in 26 presidential votes in 27 constituencies does not matter. So you'll go ahead and announce a winner anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, that must be.
I think okay. I think I now understand why Wakil Emmanuel has been sympathizing with Chereka. Eli,
Thank you.
Let me just make it simple.
Be brief so that we can. I think Dan is back. I
want to make it very simple for him. We have 10. We have 800 in. 2 remaining. Out of the 8, I have 6. Why do you need the remaining 2? I've already beaten you. And there is no guarantee that the remaining 27 constituencies will vote for Raila Odinga as a block.
How am I going to know whether you've beaten me if the results have not been announced?
Let's kindly.
You can
kindly. Let's give Dan a chance. Dan, I think, is back on.
Yes.
Dan is back on, and Dan, as we continue engaging with our learned friends, please bring in your 2 cents on. I had asked you about the whole idea of the petition. Yes. Do you think it's for the good? It's a progressive idea that it will help maybe strengthen our courts, strengthen our democracy, and also strengthen our electoral process. Then also talk on the petitions. Do you think that the petitions by Azimio stand ground that would lead to another nullification of an election?
Yes, thank you very much, Cedric. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Nelson, it's good to see you again after such a long time. My good friend Elijah, pleasure to meet you. So, I've been following this conversation even when I was in the waiting room, and indeed it's a good conversation. I've heard Nelson express his ideas, his thoughts. Similarly, I've heard Elijah, put out his argument, and of course, I have my, my 2 cents, as you say. I believe, first of all, the attack, let me use the word the attack, because it's an attack of the so-called independent institutions in our country is unwarranted. In this way, Cedric, IBC is not a person. Yes. From where I sit. IBC is not an individual. If we, the Kenyan people, and the electorate and the other people who've been elected into office can say that, look, 90% of the election was okay, the MCAs it was okay, women rep was okay, senator it was okay, governors it was okay, but when it reached to the presidential election, then the IBC does not become an IBC, but rather it becomes a person, and people want to personalize the war on Chebukati. I think that is very, very unfortunate. And let me say this. You've asked me a very simple question, whether this Supreme Court by Raila is good for democracy or is good for progress of the country. I think it's unwanted. Elections are won and lost at the ballot, in my view. And sometimes it's very hard to take loss. It's very, very hard to take loss. We have to give it to Raila. He has tried. And for me, I think what he's doing now is managing his supporters, their emotions and everything. That, look, we've not given up yet. We still have a battle to fight. But I think it's over. It's done. Chebukati used to say, I followed this election keenly. Chebukati will say something at Bomas, and he will say something like, here, I'm only accumulating numbers that are coming from the polling stations. Election is won and lost at the polling station. So what I think politicians and even the observers, they were having some sort of agents there taking, taking stock of the Form 34S. Now, if that is what is happening and the vote is taken to Bomas and Chebukati as the national returning officer, his work is to announce those results. Where does the 4 commissioners come in? Are you trying to tell us that the 22 million Kenyans make a decision, but then 4 or 6 people sit down to go through that decision and give it a whole new perspective? That is wrong. If the Azimio team, their idea is to go to the Supreme Court and tell the Supreme Court, look, Chebukati, there was no quorum at the IBC, Chebukati did this and this, there is no case. It's a no case scenario because Chebukati acted in his capacity as the national returning officer just to give the numbers that are already out there. So they should come up with a different theory to tell people like our votes were stolen. I've heard these stories of Kidongo and whoever saying their systems were infiltrated. First, the question someone should ask these people, how did you know the system was infiltrated in the first place and you're not an IBC official? Where did you get this information from? They have made allegations that we had 200 attempts on the IBC infrastructure. How did you know we had 200 attempts if you are not one of them trying to do another attempt? Then you realize we met there as thieves. You see? The people in Azimio, and Emmanuel, I've heard you very clearly. I've heard you clearly your point. My takeaway and my last point on this issue is this election is over. The country needs to move forward. We might not all agree with William Ruto. I have also reservations when it comes to him and his leadership. But the verdict is he won the election and people should learn and move on. Whether the Supreme Court will nullify the election, that's another case scenario, but I doubt if that will happen. That is my take, Cedric.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Let me just go back. In a minute.
I'm bringing it to you. Yes, yep. I'm bringing it to you, Emmanuel. Your response to what Dan has said, and then I'm also bringing back to you the question that I had asked before. Is there a chance, because we have heard on rallies like the recent rally that the Right Honorable former Prime Minister had in Mombasa, and many of his supporters, other politicians, saying that the Supreme Court should declare Raila as president-elect. So as you respond to what Dan has said, also answer the question that is there a possibility of the Supreme Court, and under what circumstances would the Supreme Court declare another candidate as president-elect and not the IBC doing so?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. But before I go there, let me remind us again in the 2017 judgment, and we have to go back to that judgment because that judgment is what is what really prescribed what the IBC is supposed to do and what it is not supposed to do. In that judgment, the Supreme Court said, my favorite paragraph actually in that judgment is this. I don't remember the number of that paragraph, but the Supreme Court held, the majority decision was that whether it be about numbers or whether it be about processes, an election must be about the will of the people. An election must reflect the will of the people. If William Ruto won the election and he did not reach the constitutional threshold, even by one vote, then giving him the certificate is unconstitutional. That is the law. If and that can happen to us. We know it has happened in this country. We know it has happened before. Some of us have suffered electoral injustices. We have seen what electoral injustices have done in this country. If you look at 1992, 1997, 207, 2013, 2017, these are issues that have continued to come up time and again. The issue of the electoral injustices. And therefore, now that we have a Supreme Court that has the jurisdiction, original jurisdiction, to settle these kind of disputes, and you see petitioners, rather than going to the streets to demonstrate, people are now going to the Supreme Court because they have faith in the Supreme Court, because they have seen in the past that when the IBC does what it is not supposed to do, there was a Supreme Court that was there to actually call them out. And therefore, people have faith in this institution that let us go there and take our grievances. And that is a good habit because then it is building trust in Kenyans that they can actually let institutions be able to work. So that is one.
Cedric,
the issue,
just a
the
minute.
issue, I'm coming to your question now on the issue of nullification of the election. In my view, if you look at jurisprudence across the world, the nullification of potential election is not a simple thing. It is not something that usually happens often. And therefore, in my view, I think if we base our arguments on jurisprudence alone, then the petitions have probably less than 1% chance that they are going to be allowed. However, the Supreme Court again in 2017, and Maraga sitting there as the Chief Justice said that if the Supreme Court was going to receive another petition of that magnitude in 2017, of an election that was flawed, then the Supreme Court will not have any issue nullifying it again. That is what the Supreme Court said, that we will not have a problem nullifying another election if that election that is brought here for us to nullify is not consistent with the prescription of the Constitution. And therefore, I don't think, in my view, like I said earlier, I don't think that the Supreme Court would actually exercise the jurisdiction it has, because election courts under Section 80, subsection 4 of the Election Act, and this was an amendment that was done by Jubilee. The Jubilee that actually the side that Mandela is now talking from, the kind of Murkomen, the kind of Sudis, and those are the people that passed the amendment in Section 80.
Party leader of Jubilee.
Mandela just a minute.
They're the people that passed the amendment in Section 80, subsection 4. What does Section 80, subsection 4 say? That section gives an election court jurisdiction to give a certificate of election to a petitioner upon proof that that petitioner was actually the successful party in an election. That jurisdiction is based upon a recount of votes. But it is not.
Cedric,
But
okay.
it is not just the physical recount of votes. That election court might actually audit. It might actually audit the tally that was made by the IEBC. For example, the IEBC might have made a mistake in their tallying. Maybe they included votes that were not supposed to be included in the tally. Maybe they added the numbers wrongly, and therefore in adding those numbers, they made a mistake and declared a wrong candidate. So if that error is apparent, then an election court has the jurisdiction to nullify the election, the certificate of election that was issued to one party, and order the IEBC or direct it to issue that certificate to another person and declare that person as elected under that article.
Thank you.
Cedric, I know you want to bring
Thank you for
Nelson.
explaining that to us, and I'm sure Wakili will want to respond to that. And being the two lawyers in the house, I'll give him a chance. But let's have Dan had a response first, then before I come to you, Wakili, and let's try and keep it brief because the timelines are not allowing us. Dan.
Thank you very much, Cedric. I know Nelson wants to say something about this, but I have two things to put across. Number one, I've heard Emmanuel, what he's saying that, yes, the Supreme Court can decide this way and say this person did not win and this one needs to get the certificate. The question we need to ask ourselves, if we are admitting, even as Neo is admitting, the election was not done according to the law, then how does Supreme Court use the same results to announce a winner? So that conversation does not hold. It's like speaking from both sides of the mouth.
And that is why I said, I do not think any election court in this matter would exercise that jurisdiction. In my view, if the Supreme Court actually finds that there were irregularities and illegalities in this election, the Supreme Court will find it easier to nullify the election and call for a fresh election. However, I think in my view, that would cause another bigger problem. And this is the problem. This will be the second presidential results that would have been nullified under the watch of Chebukati as we speak. And therefore, I do not think if an election is called in 60 days, the parties would again agree to go back with Chebukati overseeing those elections, in my view.
Well, that is clear.
I want to jump in.
Just let me finish my point, Nelson, and then you come in.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have heard.
Thank you. Finish up, Dan.
Yes.
Finish up, Dan. Then we take it to Wakili Mandela.
I have heard some people, and Emmanuel has alluded to the same thing, that we are following democratic ways, and this is a good thing, going to the Supreme Court to maybe nullify the election if they find it not to be valid or not done within the law. I just have one observation here. Is going to the streets, first of all, an option? It's not an option. If you have a leader that some people have to advise, please don't go to the streets, go to the court. What kind of a leader is that? According to me, that speaks to our moral fabric. That yes, these institutions, we purport to support them, we purport to believe in them, but deep down we don't. Our former Prime Minister was in Mombasa recently, and he said a statement to the effect that the Supreme Court must nullify that election and announce me as the winner. Who gives the Supreme Court instruction? Who? I mean, the verdict will be based on evidence. So I think some people are living in a make-believe world that we are above the constitution. We call the shots here. We decide the way forward. I think it's unfortunate, and but let's again follow the process.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my point. Yeah.
Yes, Cedric, can I jump in now?
Thank you, Dan. And I think to that extent, we have politics, then there are courts and politicians. Politicians, yes, politicians, as I was saying, politicians will do the politicking, but then at the end of the day, the courts will also do their part as courts. And Mandela, you can now respond to kindly. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Cedric. Now, three things. Number one, Wakili Emmanuel has clearly said that Maraga stated in during the 2017 verdict that should IBC not comply with the law, should IBC not hold election in compliance with the law, the court will nullify the results again. I have no problem with that. I don't have a problem with the courts nullifying the election. But now, let's go back and ask ourselves, to what gain did the Supreme Court in 2017 nullify that election? The intention of nullifying the election was the parties to go and participate in another election for a favorable outcome. The script is the same. When Raila Odinga filed a petition at the Supreme Court in 2017, he raised issues concerning the election, but he also had a condition that IEBC, led by Chebukati, was to go. The court proceeded and nullified the election and ordered a fresh election in 60 days. Did Raila Odinga participate in that election? No. The same script. You have a petition before the court. Among the prayers being that the election should be, the result should be nullified. And automatically the law says if the election is nullified, we need to go back to the ballot in 60 days. If you're going to be ordered to go to the ballot in the next 60 days, clearly Raila Odinga will still not participate into that election. That was number one. Number two, as Dan has rightly said, you want to be declared as president-elect when even in your own petition, you cannot substantiate that you garnered enough numbers to make you cross the threshold. When Emmanuel Wakili is saying that there shall be audit of the electoral process, not necessarily being the manual count. Of course, if IBC being the electoral body is given 7 days to tally that election, it beats logic that the Supreme Court, which only has less than 5 days to listen to that petition after filing and response, filing the petition and responding to it, will have enough time to tally 14 million votes within the 5 days and give us a fair verdict. So the Supreme Court is most likely not going to declare or to verify or to retally the election. But still, even if Supreme Court was to have enough manpower to tally the votes, how will Supreme Court then proceed and declare Raila Odinga president-elect out of the very process that is alleging to be flawed? Out of the very commission that he says was compromised? Out of the very commission that he has gone to Mombasa to bastardize before the public? That was my point number two. Point number three, Elijah is quoting Article 84 of the Election Act that gives the electoral court powers to tally and announce the president. But the question says the only person who can declare the president-elect is the chairperson of the IBC, who is the national returning officer. Wakili here knows very well that an act of parliament cannot supersede a constitution. And therefore, if the constitution says there is a conflict between the constitution and the election act, then the constitution reigns supreme. Therefore, the only person, even the Supreme Court, I'm sure they'll quote this in the next verdict during the hearing stage and it will come out in the response. It's only the chairperson of IEBC who can declare a president-elect. Okay. So this issue of the Supreme Court being able to, and Jubilee coming up with this, we all know what Jubilee did when in power. And we all know the very reason why Raila Odinga was at Mombasa and addressing the Supreme Court and addressing IEBC as if it was giving orders. This has been the mentality since the handshake. Bulldozing the independent commissions, bulldozing the National Police Service, bulldozing the judiciary, bulldozing the parliament, bulldozing the Senate. That has been the mentality. So when they speak, they're still wallowing in the miasma of the handshake, not realizing that the people have decided and given power to the rightful people, and there is a new government in place. These orders cannot suffice, and therefore, Wakili needs to know that the Constitution reigns supreme, and the only person who can declare president-elect is the IEBC chairperson as per the Constitution.
Thanks, Wakili. Thanks, Wakili. I can see time is very much not on our side, and I'm hoping that we can continue with this conversation next week. But I'll bring to you, Eli, Wakili, to respond to what you said. And then finally, as you give us your final remarks, tell us that, do you think that just in case it gets to an extent where the election is nullified, do you think within 60 days we will be in a position to hold another election with the IEBC as constituted, or even is there a possibility of having it changed and an election happening within those stated timelines?
Good.
Thank you. What I want to say is this: it is very important in a democratic country like ours for us not to lose sight. It is very easy for us to forget where we are coming from, and especially in our generation, we don't have a lot of knowledge of what, unless you are a reader, you may not be able to understand where we are coming from. The issue of IEBC, it is true, the chairperson of the IEBC is by law the national returning officer for the presidential election. That one is true, and that is constitutional. But the Constitution requires that IEBC, as a state officer, to discharge his duties within certain limits of the Constitution. In which case, if the chairperson of the IEBC, who in this case is the returning officer for purposes of a presidential election, acts ultra vires or outside his jurisdiction, then a court of law has, and that is the Supreme Court in this case, the court of law has jurisdiction to actually audit again and interrogate his decision and interrogate his actions, and actually either uphold them if they are within the Constitution, dismiss them if they are not within the Constitution. So we cannot say that Chebukati, as the returning officer for presidential election, is the only person who can announce the presidential election, even if he makes a mistake, even if he declares Wamwaure, who had 0.01% of the votes, even if he's the one who is declared, then that person is the one person who has to be sworn in, because Chebukati is the natural returning officer. I mean, we have to be serious. That is why we have the Supreme Court. Lastly, on your question, as I finish, my prediction is this, and I said it even in my social media platforms. One of the worst decisions, even though it may go Azimio's way, one of the worst decisions that may be made by this election court, which is the IEBC, is actually to nullify this election. It is a good decision if it is informed by legal principles, but again, it is a very dangerous decision. Why? Because, like I said, we are having a chairperson of the IEBC who has had an election, a presidential election, before, nullified by the same Supreme Court. At that time, remember, some people were actually saying that he should resign and he should be taken to court, he should be answered and all that. Right? That conversation is going to come up again. And this is a state officer. This is a public officer that is supposed to act within certain limits. I predict that if we are directed to go back to an election, that election might not happen. That election might not happen because And even if it happens, it will happen under the supervision of an interim commission, because Chebukati will just be told, you've demonstrated incompetence, you've demonstrated inability to handle elections in Kenya, and therefore let us have another interim commission that will actually deliver to Kenyans an election as prescribed by law. That is my 2 cents.
Okay. Thank you. We have actually overrun our time. Dan, your final remarks is Kenyans wait for the whole process at the Supreme Court. We know we will be having a lot of English and law flowing around.
Yes.
What would you have to say about the whole process and how Kenyans are supposed to react to whatever outcome comes?
Yes, thank you, Cedric. Because of time, I'll be very brief. And let me say this in my perspective. Number one, the Supreme Court will not nullify the election. It will not nullify the election. Number two, this issue of war against IBC, it's very clear. It's not even about IBC. It's about Chebukati. You know, like the way my good friend Elijah is putting it, that the same person overseeing another election, it can never be, when you are talking about an institution, you reduce it down to an individual, because this person is acting on behalf of the institution. I'm sure Chebukati does not tally all those numbers. There are people behind the scenes who do the numbers, and then after verification process, he has to make the formal announcement, which he did. My last take on this whole point is this. The cases before the court will be probed based on evidence. I have seen a lot of material floating around, people saying, you know, election was stolen in Mount Kenya and Rift Valley, and all those noise. That is people prosecuting their case in the public domain. It does not amount to anything in a courtroom. And I think you guys are lawyers, you know that better than I do. This election, let's wait for the evidence and the rebuttal from the other side. When they do their submission, I think it's from tomorrow or whichever day. And based on that, you'll be surprised the whole thing will be reduced to an issue of maybe 1 or 2 votes here, which I'm very sure the chairman, like he used to say in his normal session, that if we note an error in Form 34A, we take note of that error and we shall submit it together in case of a petition. I'm sure IBC has done that. And there will be no nullification of election. The country has to move forward. We cannot be in a political mood forever. And again, we can never say IBC is so good just because one person has won. No. If you lose, you lose. We accept, we move on. I've told you, many people are not supporting William Ruto. But again, that is the nature of our democracy. We have to accept the way we have accepted the governors, the senators, the women reps, and all the MPs, and say, okay, you guys, you've been given the mandate by the majority, even if the majority, there's a very small margin, but then serve the country and serve the whole country in good faith. That's the way to go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Your final remarks, Wakili Mandela, as we take this show home.
Yes, thank you very much. It has been a good session. Having to listen from either side, that is what is important. And then, of course, this is also what will be happening at the Supreme Court, people having to say their side of the story, back to the evidence, and we let the Supreme Court justices to determine. Now, my parting shot will be, Kenya should just relax. From where I stand, there is no enough evidence to nullify this election. This election, you cannot say the election was bungled and the servers were hacked. When you need to submit a scanned copy virtually, then compare with a physical. Now, does it mean these hackers could even as well just abduct the returning officers who are delivering this form as Bomas of Kenya and change them along the way, and then deliver the doctored copies at the Bomas of Kenya? Of course, bit logic. And that's why it has come out very clearly that the allegation of infiltrating the IEBC system is the very allegation raised in 2017. The only thing that has changed was the date. They just erased, because it's still in August, they only erased the date and the year, replaced 2017 with 2022. Number two, in the most unlikely event that this election is nullified, I can assure you, Cedric, and I'm sure after the Supreme Court verdict will come back here, there shall be no election in Kenya in 60 days. The intention is to extend Uhuru Kenyatta's reign. In the most unlikely event that this election is nullified, there shall be no election in 60 days. And the intention of the entire handshake coalition is to make sure that William Ruto does not rise to power and Uhuru Kenyatta continues to reign in this country. That is the intention. We'll come back here after the Supreme Court, should it nullify the election. My parting shot is Kenyans have been have shown maturity during, after, before, during, and after the election. We are still waiting. This is the discussion we're having. If you feel like there is a point you disagree with your neighbor or with your friend, you discuss and put everything on the table and wait for the Supreme Court to determine. And therefore, my parting shot will be Kenyans have been so mature, and that is what we intend to continue. This election come, the next election will come, but there shall never be a place where we can always say the election is fair, because in this competitive democracy, one person must lose. And you see, the essence of us having 51 threshold was to make sure that the majority, at least even by one, are in power. Unlike in 2007, where we gave having Raila Odinga having 7 million, and then Kalonzo having 5 million, and then Uhuru having 7.5 million. It means the supporters of Kalonzo and Raila were in opposition, yet were the majority. But the reason why we had a 50+1 threshold, it means the majority wanted the person that has been duly elected. And that's what we need to accept. We may not always have our way, but at least being a democracy, we always need to know that we enter into a race to either win or lose. But above all, we remain Kenyans, and I add that the spirit that we need to carry forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Akili, and thanks to all of you for tuning in, showing up for this discussion. Even though the communication was made to you very late, thank you very much for showing up. And I'm hoping that we shall continue to have this conversation maybe some other time later on. If you are called upon, kindly show up, and we will appreciate that. Thanks for everyone who has tuned into the Alternative Voice for this session. And just quickly, let me go through those who have watched and managed to comment. Today, we have had actually the highest number of people watching. And thanks to you guys who have showed up. And just let me rush through the comments quickly. We have, that is Daniel Jaka tuned in. Thank you very much, Don, for tuning into the discussion. We have my sister there, Christine. Thanks for tuning in, Christine. We have very many other people. That's Eliakim tuned into the discussion also and managed to comment as well. Thanks, Eliakim. That is Haron Mahanu. Thank you very much, Haron. We have Geoffrey Okoli also tuned in and managed to comment. Amos Tuo, thank you very much. We have who else? Tuned in, Wilkista tuned in, and Wilkista has another comment there that is very interesting. That if you feel that they are stealing for you very much, you should also try stealing. I don't think that's the way to go, Wilkista. Thank you for tuning in, Prophetess Deborah. Thank you very much also for tuning in and managing to comment. We have Maureen Lumumba tuned in also, Juliet Combs, Geoffrey Okoli, Meshak Twea, Aisa Juma, and who else? Meshak. We have Chebet Martin also tuned into the discussion. We have Susan Salim also tuned in, and most of them had questions. And I think those of you who are following the Alternative Voice, you'll check out the Alternative Voice and also on my Facebook page. That's Hayeka Cedric. You can check there and try to respond to some of the questions that have been asked. Thank you very much for showing up. I hope to see you all of you some other time on this platform.
Sure.
Immediately after the verdict.
Yes, thank you very much, Cedric.
Thank
you for your time.
So we send it home.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. Let's send it home. Thanks for those who tuned in. You can follow our platforms, The Alternative Voice. You can follow me as well, KK Cedric, on all platforms, and Hayeka Cedric on Facebook. I'll see you some other time.
Sure, thanks.
It's Trends O'Clock. This is Trends KE with KK Cedric.
I can now go and cook. Naweza kupika sasa.